This lesson serves as a bit of an introduction to our new topic of homeostasis, but it also serves as the building block that we are going to build our different examples off of. So today we're going to be looking at feedback loops and the essential components of these feedback loops. So before we get to that, let's start with what homeostasis actually is. So a simple definition for homeostasis, it is the maintenance of a constant internal environment, or what we call a steady state. And this is despite changes in the external environment. So what are we trying to maintain? Well, we're trying to maintain our body's acidity, concentration of sugar, its oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, its temperature, its water level, you name it, okay? Now, why do we want this? Well, your body is a finely tuned machine, and this machine requires an optimum level of all of these things that we've just mentioned in order to work at an ideal or optimum level. Now, your body isn't perfect, okay? And it's very rarely ever at a state of perfect steady state, okay? It's very rarely at homeostasis. And what it does is it fluctuates above and below this particular set point. So homeostasis is very much a balancing act, and it's due to a constantly changing external environment. So to help us, we have these tolerance limits, okay? And these tolerance limits are the exact, or not exact necessarily, but they are the lines which we can't cross. They are the things that we need to exist within. If we go too much one way or the other way, it is going to dramatically affect our ability to function normally, okay? After we go past our tolerance limits, dysfunction is going to occur, and in extreme instances, it can lead to death. Now, what you see here in our diagram is right in the middle, we have our optimum range. Our optimum range is where our body is working as it should, it's working perfectly. If we go too far to the right of this, it very quickly begins to decrease, and our ability to function is inhibited. So if we look all the way down the bottom, you'll see one of the examples is temperature. If our temperature increases, our ability to do all of our cellular functions also decreases. If we get really hot, it puts us into a zone of stress, and our body doesn't like being stressed. If we exist in this zone for too long, it can lead to death. And this zone of intolerance that you'll see on either side is where our body can no longer tolerate this change to our temperature, a change to our pH, a change to our water levels. It becomes too much. So we really want to exist in this optimal range. So how do we do that? Well, in order to exist in this optimal range, we have what is known as a feedback system. And this feedback system allows our body to respond to a stimulus, and it can either do it in a way known as positive feedback, which we will talk about right at the end of this lesson, or the one that we really care about in this topic, negative feedback. Okay, so these systems are circular systems allowing our body to respond to stimulus so that we can maintain this balancing act of homeostasis. So, some of the different things: body temperature, blood pressure, blood glucose. The ones that we really need to know and care about are these two here, temperature and glucose. So, what detects these changes? Here are our receptors once again. This follows on from our receptors lesson. Now, the ones that we've already spoken about are our temperature receptors, okay? We have spoken about these other chemo and osmoreceptors. Namely, we've spoken a little bit about our osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus. The ones that we're going to add a little bit more detail to now are the chemoreceptors. And you'll notice we have three groups of chemoreceptors. Firstly, we have those that detect carbon dioxide in the medulla oblongata, and those that detect the concentration of hydrogen ions in the aortic and the carotid bodies. We also have chemoreceptors in the pancreas, namely alpha and beta cells. So, negative feedback. Okay, negative feedback also gets called steady state control, as it helps our body to maintain its steady state, its state of homeostasis. And what it does is it reduces or eliminates the stimulus. So if our stimulus is going up, our body's response to this stimulus in negative feedback is going to be to bring that thing back down. In the instance that our stimulus is a decrease, our body's response to that stimulus is going to be to increase it. So we have a few key things here. Number one, the stimulus. The stimulus is the change. Secondly, we have a receptor, the thing that detects the change. This gets funneled into a modulator, which interprets this information from the receptor and coordinates a response. The effector is the thing that initiates and acts upon the response. We have the response itself before finally we have this process of feedback. And the feedback will always be, in the case of negative feedback anyway, the opposite of the stimulus. So the stimulus, again, very simply, a stimulus is simply a change. So this could be an increase in body temperature, a decrease in body temperature. It could be an increase in the amount of sugar in your body. It could be anything, okay? A stimulus is simply a change in the body, and it sets off this chain of reactions, leading to a receptor detecting the change. Okay, so as we mentioned previously, a receptor is a specialized sensory cell, and it's something that detects that change. So we've got chemo, thermo, mechano, photo, and pain receptors. Now, we haven't really mentioned photoreceptors previously. Photoreceptors are found in the eye, and they help us with response to light. Pain receptors we've known previously as nociceptors. Moving on down from our receptors, we head to the modulator. Now the modulator, another name for this modulator anyway, is the control center. And it's the control center because it's what receives that information from the receptor and creates an action going for it. So in the case of thermoregulation, when we talk about it, we're going to be looking in detail at the hypothalamus. This is the control center. This is the modulator. When we look at, say, blood gas levels, so things like carbon dioxide concentration and hydrogen ion concentration, we're going to be looking at the medulla oblongata. Okay? So the modulator is the control center. Up next, we have the effector, and an effector is always going to be a muscle or a gland. It is the thing that receives the message from the modulator and determines the response. Okay? Finally, we go to our response. The response is the actual action taken. Okay, so we've previously seen a response when we've looked at reflex arcs and spinal reflex arcs, and if we touch something, our bicep muscle contracts, which would be the effector. The response is the hand pulling away. Okay, now in this instance, the response could be, in the case of a stimulus where our body temperature increased, it could be a decrease in body temperature. The negative feedback, okay, this is simply what occurs when the response is in the opposite direction to the stimulus. So the feedback in this instance is we go back to normal. So here is a nice diagram coming from the book. So the feedback again, I like how it's represented here. The feedback is what changes that original stimulus. So the final little part here, I mentioned it earlier, is positive feedback. This is not a form of steady state control. This is quite different, as positive feedback does not maintain homeostasis. Hence, there's only a few very select examples that we actually talk about of this. The reason that it doesn't maintain homeostasis, it intensifies or reinforces that stimulus. So if something increases, it causes that thing to increase, which causes it to increase further and further and further and further. So an example of this is contractions during labour, and this is the diagram that I've got down the bottom here. So in this instance, we can see that the baby's head bumps against the cervix. That causes a message to be sent to the brain to release oxytocin. Oxytocin then travels back towards the uterus, and it causes uterine contractions, which causes the baby's head to bump against the cervix, restarting this process. So this positive feedback mechanism is always going to lead to a really intensification of that original stimulus. It will not last forever. It will always meet a natural resolution, which in the case of childbirth here is the child being passed out through the birth canal.